There have been glimpses, mere glimpses, I acknowledge, but glimpses of insight. Chancellor Merz, who came into office warmongering and has beat the war drums ever since, just about every day, said just before New Year's that Russia is a European state. It's got European culture, and there will have to be relations between Europe, meaning European Union, and Russia for that reason after this conflict ends. Well, this was the first statement I heard of this kind, rather than the idea that there's going to be another wall a mile high between the two sides. If one would look at the modern history objectively, not from a partisan point of view, not from a US point of view, or a European point of view, or a Russian point of view, or a Chinese point of view, what you find is that actually all sides could get along if they would just stop warmongering against the others. And Europe's big mistake is this Russophobia, this idea that Russia is intrinsically and inherently evil. And therefore, that is the inexorable adversary of Europe. It ain't true. It hasn't been true. It was to say who was evil between Germany and Russia in the middle of the 20th century would give you quite a different conclusion. To understand what Yeltsin and Gorbachev were really offering the West should have been the most clear and dramatic wake-up call for Europe imaginable. I was there those years. I know it. Peace was absolutely possible. It was desired by the Russians, no question in the world. In fact, Gorbachev unilaterally disbanded the Warsaw Pact and said Germany should reunify, of course, on the condition, very clear and explicit, that NATO wouldn't enlarge one bit to the east. Okay. All of this could have been achieved if the two sides had just been honest. But the United States, much more than Europe, was completely dishonest in this period. And the Russophobia of Eastern Europe, whatever one thinks, you could at least understand it, although I don't agree with it. But it should not have guided European policy overall. So Europe trapped itself, and it remains trapped. But if it could step back and think, which admittedly is very hard for these politicians to do, they would see that till today, it's possible to have peace with Russia. It would be built on neutrality of states in between the European Union and Russia, first and foremost, Ukraine. That was the whole idea of how to achieve a peaceful settlement. The same reason that Austria was both neutral and safe during the entire Cold War period, because it was in between and it did not lose its security by being neutral, not at all. It increased its security. So there were ways forward, there are ways forward now, but it requires a different approach. And the British are the most hopeless in this. They've had the same approach since 1840. Germany has been a country that has understood East politics, Ostpolitik, of Willy Brandt and others after that. If there were a Helmut Schmidt or a Helmut Kohl, things would be different. If there were a Chancellor Merkel up until the second day of the Bucharest NATO summit, because she knew that what the United States was pushing was all wrong, it would be different. So we can't give up that this is hopeless, but it is urgent that Europe come to understand if it continues to prosecute this war with Russia, it's going to find itself nowhere in this world, just broken apart. An enemy of Russia, an enemy of China, an enemy of the United States, bereft of a functioning economy, and that is the current line of travel.
Well, even as Europe now is on this path, as you suggest, and I very much agree with, I'm very skeptical about the ability to do anything about it, because at the moment the discussion in Europe is, can we even talk to Russia? This is where we are, even as we're losing the war. And the British and the Baltic states, of course, say, no, we can't talk to Russia. That's just, that's not acceptable. And even if we can solve this, then we have to move on to the next stage. Who should represent us in the talks with Russia? I mean, we're never even going to get to sitting down with the Russians. And once sit down, we're going to start with the position that Russia more or less has to capitulate. There has to be NATO expansion. Ukraine needs an 800,000 peacetime army. I mean, it's just very hard to see any actual diplomacy. I guess just as a final question, how do you explain this though? Is it just because it's 27 countries so can only unite on Russophobia, or how do you explain the inability to do very basic diplomacy for basic national interests?
I think that it would be possible to find a way forward, not with all 27 agreeing suddenly, but if Germany and ideally Germany, France, Italy would find some rationality. And let me explain why. Germany bears the most responsibility and has the highest stakes. This war in Ukraine came about because of German duplicity as much as U.S. duplicity. It was Germany, after all, that made the deal. No NATO enlargement in return for German reunification. And Germany violated that. Actually, already in the early 1990s, it wasn't only the United States that was calling for NATO enlargement. It was also Germany that was calling for NATO enlargement. So Germany cheated. This is first. Second, Germany cheated again, actually several times, 2014, 2015 onward. Because in 2014, Germany helped to secure a deal with Yanukovych. You will stay in power, and we will have a unity government and early elections in Ukraine by the end of 2014. The United States broke that, sided with the violent coup that took place the day after the European Yanukovych agreement was reached, and then Germany quickly went along with that rather than saying, no, we actually had an agreement. Yanukovych is still the president. That's how we're going to proceed. So Germany dropped the ball again. Then in 2015, when the Minsk II agreement was signed, Germany was to be the guarantor of Minsk II. And as I've said many times, Minsk II was actually modeled on the case of South Tyrol in Italy, which is a German ethnic region of northern Italy that has autonomy. And Chancellor Merkel knew all about South Tyrol because she visited it, and the German politicians, ethnic German politicians in South Tyrol. And that was to be the model for the Donbass, that it would have autonomy. And Germany and France were to be the two guarantors of that. Germany, again, dropped the ball. That's Chancellor Merkel, I'm sorry to say, because I like her. But she dropped the ball again. So the first way to turn this around is actually for Germany to turn this around, because it has really violated its commitments repeatedly. If Germany did that, France should be able to do that. I had a conversation with Macron in 2023. I'm almost sure that it was at a conference that he hosted, where he said, yes, NATO enlargement, I agree with you, Mr. Sachs, that's the provocation. But he was not consequent to act on that. As for Italy, strangely, interestingly, there is no Russophobia in Italy. Italy is politically and socially okay with Russia, actually. But the prime minister goes along with NATO, or goes along with her European colleagues. But it would not be a hard political sell in Italy to say we need diplomacy. Well, if you got those three big ones, that would change the dynamic in Europe quite quickly. I know and by the way, Central Europe, the former Habsburg lands, if I could put it that way, of the Czech Republic under Babiš, the Slovakia under Roberto Fico, and Hungary led by Viktor Orban, they're all in favor of diplomacy. So that's not even a hard sell. That's already the case. So you'd have Central Europe, you'd have Germany, you'd have France, you'd have Italy, you'd have Spain under Pedro Sanchez. It's not impossible. But unfortunately, Merz was terrible from the first day. A German chancellor should never come into office just beating the drums of war without even trying diplomacy. And I'm afraid that that is exactly what Merz did. And his predecessor, Olaf Scholz, was unbelievable. He's the man that stood next to Joe Biden as Joe Biden explained that the United States was going to destroy the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And he kept mum about it. We don't even understand how Scholz was such a failure. Did the U.S. have something on him? We don't know. But the point is, German leadership has been extraordinarily weak and duplicitous, I would say, at key moments in this. Germany has a responsibility to turn this around as the biggest single country and, of course, the major industrial power, albeit a failing one, in Europe right now. This is what I would hope could happen. I'm not giving up on it because it's too important to just let Europe continue to founder and pull itself apart in pieces or appease Trump time and again in the most pathetic way. Ruta, I won't even talk about. It's beyond imagining. And interestingly, I may say, by the way, Jens Stoltenberg of your country, who's finance minister and was the Secretary General of NATO and someone I've known for decades, I believe I'm correct that he said recently that it's time to talk to the Russians. He never would have said that as Secretary General of NATO. And when he stepped down as Secretary General and started to say things different from what he was saying as Secretary General of NATO, I spoke to a political leader and said, what's going on with Jens? Why didn't he say that when he was Secretary General? And I was told, well, Jeff, when he was Secretary General, who was he working for? And I said, you mean the United States? He says, yes. So he wouldn't say something different. Now, Mark Rutte is pathetic. You don't have to call this mad king president of ours daddy as Secretary General. It's a little bit of an invitation to have Greenland invaded, I must say, how pathetic Rutte is. But the point is, a lot of leaders in Europe know they're just so cowardly or so inured to the way things have gone for decades of falsehoods that they just can't speak right now. So I'm not giving up because I think that there still is a solution for Europe, and as long as there is a solution, maybe somebody will find it.